from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Let's forget about Brexit for a bit, shall we? I mean, it's just all too depressing. It's taking forever. It's making us angry and upset. I have to say, I was so hacked off with what happened to Chequers. I went out fishing yesterday morning just to get away from it all for a few hours. But some good stuff is happening. The weather. Can you believe the weather? I mean, it was like I was out on the channel yesterday morning. It was like being, frankly, in the Mediterranean at the height of summer. It was quite extraordinary. Day after day of incredible weather. And John Ketley, the famous weatherman, legendary weatherman, you may remember, back when the Beast from the East was on in March, I said to him, it was the old joke about the barbecue summer. Once the BBC told us it'd be a barbecue summer and it rained for 4 months. I asked him, would it be a barbecue summer? And he said, we should expect the best weather of the summer during the Wimbledon fortnight. Well, we're halfway through that. The weather has been stunning. He'll be on during this hour to tell us how much good weather there is to come. And what scenes of joy. What amazing celebration. An England football team that seemed to be somewhat devoid of individual stars, but playing together as a team under a manager in Gareth Southgate, who no doubt will bring back a great wave of support for waistcoat wearing again, but somebody who understated, modest, professionally, quietly getting on with the job. And I don't know about you, but I think this Captain Kane, I mean, what an example he sets to young people. He's not a yob, he's not a lout, he speaks well, clearly got a fantastic work ethic, he's leading from the front, and I think the country has rather fallen in love with this team and with the manager. You know, and I've sort of seen various commentators who aren't necessarily even football fans saying, wow, I'm getting swept up in all of this. Some of the scenes yesterday, you sort of London Bridge basically closed down as tens of thousands of people went into the street to celebrate. And the flag, you know, that flag that we're told is an image, a symbol of narrow-mindedness and nastiness, that cross of St George. Well, that flag, you're seeing it everywhere, all over the country. There is a resurgence of English nationalism going on right at the moment. It's riding on the back of the football, but the truth is there's been a resurgence of English nationalism anyway. It's been happening over the course of the last few years. Why? Well, it's all well and good for the Scots to have a bit of nationalism and the Irish to have some nationalism and the Welsh to have some nationalism. We're a bit tired of being talked down to by London politicians who don't want us to have any sense of English national identity. And there have been some extraordinary left-wing commentators over the course of the last week. One thinks of Paul Mason, formerly BBC Newsnight economics editor. You know, they're writing articles saying, we hope England lose because we don't like this display of Englishness. I find it absolutely incredible. So I want to ask you, you know, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, fans invaded yesterday an IKEA store and jumped around on the beds. Let's hear a little bit of that. So they're busy jumping on beds as they're singing this in an IKEA store. Well, you know, you should not, you know, invade an IKEA store because it happens to be Swedish, sing very loudly, frighten the customers and jump on the beds that frankly aren't your property and that you've got no intention of buying. Is that an extreme of nationalism? Is that an example of where it all goes wrong? And by the way, you can see that by going to lbc.co.uk. Go to lbc.co.uk and see the England fans in that IKEA store and perhaps do that and help make your own mind up for where this discussion goes in the course of the next hour. I think that some of the excesses that we saw last night, things being broken, some acts of vandalism, some bad stuff that happened. And I have to say, parts of central London early this morning still looked a bit like a war zone, which was an aftermath. I think people swaying around all over the place. Quite how they keep going that long, I don't know. But the point is, I don't think that behaviour in the IKEA store and elsewhere, I don't think that's about nationalism. I think that's about drunkenness, frankly, and I see the two as being separate things. I think a bigger sense of Englishness, of who we are, I think is a good, healthy, normal, natural thing. I am not in the least bit worried that English nationalism suddenly becomes something that is deeply racist or discriminatory. Please challenge me on that. Call 0345 6060 973. Please tweet in what you think to Farage and LBC, add LBC and text to 84850. And I haven't forgotten you on Facebook, because you can comment there too. Steve is calling from Seaford in East Sussex. Good morning, Steve. Good
morning.
I don't know how Seaford was last night and whether you're seeing lots across St George's down there.
Everywhere.
Right. And do you see this as being a very, very regressive, bad, backward step of Brexit Britain gone wrong and become nationalistic?
No, I think it's the best thing that's ever happened. Celebrate the 20 years. Ever since I was a kid, the narrative changed in the 70s. I used to love history at school, and we was, when I was very young, I'm 58 now.
Yep.
We was taught a little bit about the British Empire, this, that, and the other. Then in the 70s, it changed, and it was how bad we are. We did this, that, and the other terrible things. We should be ashamed to be English. We should never fly across St George because it represents racism, the Crusades, and all the rest of it.
Yep.
But the working class are proud to be English. That's all we got at the end of the day, isn't it? Let's have it right.
Steve, is English nationalism and is sort of overt support for the football team, do you see this very much as a working class thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I do, because, the middle class don't like it. They're all drunken yobbos. Yeah, the people in IKEA, out of order. The people jumping up and down on the private ambulance, out of order.
Yes.
But that was because people were lagging drunk. Not because, they're doing it because they want to represent English nationalism.
No,
I was drunk.
Steve, I agree with you. That is about drunkenness. They were lashed up and behaved terribly. That is not to do with nationalism. But Steve, do you understand? There are some people that would say to me, "Well, Nigel, this is all well and good, but if you're a member of an ethnic community, wouldn't you be slightly concerned about the English flag going up everywhere?"
There was a march in London a little while ago, Football Lads Alliance, 100,000 people there. No one reported it. There was people of every single colour on that march.
OK, so you don't see... I want to pin this down, Steve, because it matters. You don't see English nationalism as just being for the white working classes, then?
No, not at all.
Good.
I grew up with a West Indian community. I grew up from Willesden, North West London.
Yep.
I'm Irish descent. We come over here about 3 or 4 generations ago.
Yep.
I grew up with all the West Indian community around me. Terrific people. You know what I mean? But all the immigrants in that time come here because they wanted to be British. I had Sikh neighbours that were more British than we were. and do you know what? I was proud to have them as neighbours.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm described as, you're a right-wing racist. I couldn't give a monkey's about what colour you are. If you want to come here and you want to be British, great. Join in.
Yep.
Wear the flag.
No, terrific, Steve. And you said at the start of this is the best thing that's ever happened. So come on, tell me, how far will England go in the World Cup?
I'd love to see him get into the final. I think he's terrific because there's been no build-up for it. As you say, they're just a bunch of ordinary lads.
Yes.
No one's exceptional. I remember when Gareth Southgate missed the penalty.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was Euro 96, wasn't it? Yeah.
I was living in Crawley at the time, and so was he. I think he was living...
He wasn't good, but hey, he's a national hero now, as is the goalkeeper, of course. And I think OK, we never looked like losing to Sweden, but he did pull off a couple of great saves in the second half, didn't he?
I did, but the whole thing out there is proper English. We're understated. Just getting on, getting the head down, doing the graft, getting the job done.
Brilliant.
And
Steve,
that's what we've done
Steve,
all through our history.
thank you for your call. Steve thinks it's the best thing that's ever happened. There's nothing to worry about. What does Chris from Crouch End make of it all? Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. I don't agree with nationalism. I think what people need in this country is decorum. And a flag does not give people freedom. You were just talking about the EU. A flag does not give people freedom. It's the laws of the country which give people freedom. And decorum means also that the females should cover certain parts of their body up, and people shouldn't be jumping on beds and being drunk.
No, Chris, I absolutely agree with that. You know, displays of mass yobbery is not something I'm trying to encourage in any way at all. What I am saying, Chris, is that if people see that flag, and indeed see the football team, as being symbols of something they want to belong to, and they're pleased to be proud of belonging to it, what's wrong with that? People go to Magaluf and get drunk as well. But a flag, people get hung up on the flag. As I say, it's not the flag that gives the country freedom. Surely we want, and we've had a history for the few hundred years of freedom and tolerance in this country, freedom of conscience. So a flag and football, people get too obsessed with football. Is it possible, Chris, that we've had enough of being told that we don't actually need to have national identities or national boundaries? We're part of a bigger, new global order. Perhaps this rise in Englishness is part of the same phenomenon that gave us Brexit. We're tired of being told we should be internationalists. We actually are happy with our own English and British identities.
I agree with that. I don't agree with any New World Order or globalism whatsoever. I agree with countries having their own freedoms and rights. But, it's not the way to do it, to go out and get drunk.
No, I agree. Chris, I agree. Absolutely. Thank you. So, Chris there. Message from Chris to those of you who went into IKEA yesterday. You're a bunch of louts and you're giving the flag a very bad name, even if you thought it was very funny at the time. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 11:16. Forget Brexit, it's too depressing, but the country's joyous. England is happy. We're through to the semi-finals of the World Cup for the first time since 1990, when we agonisingly lost in penalties to Germany. I hated that because I had tickets for the World Cup final, which I then sold at a big loss. But hey, that's life. English nationalism is on the rise. The flag is everywhere. People are out celebrating in the most extraordinary way. But there are excesses caused, I think, by alcohol more than any other single thing. And a group of football supporters going into IKEA, singing It's Coming Home very loudly, jumping around on the beds and probably intimidating and frightening people in their shopping. Not good behaviour. You can see it on lbc.co.uk and make your own mind up on it. But overall, we've had years of being told that Scottish and Irish and Welsh nationalism are great, but please don't say you're English. And I've quoted for you before, George Orwell talking 75 years ago about how incredibly embarrassed many of the middle and middle-upper classes in this country were about any concept of Englishness. And I think we've had enough of being told that this flag represents some extremism or racism. I think we're saying two fingers to everybody. We like this identity. We're happy with it. We're going to celebrate it. And I believe that's a good thing. I think English nationalism needs to have a voice. And if it's this football that's given it that voice, then provided there is some degree of good behaviour and decorum, I haven't got a problem with it. Some may think it could lead politically to a bad place. Simon is calling from Kingston. Good morning, Simon.
Nearer than I am here.
Hello.
Hello.
I've got a cross line here. Now, who am I speaking to? It is Simon I'm talking to, right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Sorry, we're a cross line there. Good morning, Simon.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah,
were you celebrating last night?
I was indeed. It was a joyous occasion and very good to see, and certainly is a rare occasion, I have to say.
So are you, Simon, are you an extremist white nationalist because you're celebrating the football victory?
Not at all. No, not at all. I'm English, but I'm white English, but I'm not an extremist in any form or manner. And what I'd like to try and get across is I do a bit of work up in Northolt and all those kind of areas there, which is like a large sort of Indian, Asian population. And so many cars yesterday were all being driven around and all had St George's flags all hanging out of them.
Yep.
So it's wrong to assume that just because a car or people are walking around with a Union Jack or the St George's Cross, that they have to be sort of white, boorish, English men. It's wrong, completely wrong image.
So is the flag, in that sense then, Simon, is the flag then being, if you like, reclaimed by a broader community than the stereotypical image?
Absolutely, 100%. I would say that, definitely.
Good.
I remember being in the 70s, the sort of anti-Knights League. I was a member of that.
Okay.
Against sort of the National Front and all those extremists, and they were obviously using the flag in those days.
Yep.
And certainly it has turned around now, thankfully. It's definitely coming around. It's coming back to, as you say, being a symbol of British pride.
Could we say that the Cross of St George is coming home, Simon?
I would hope so. Yes,
Brilliant. Great call. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Mark on Twitter says that Labour front bencher must be walking around with a blindfold on at the moment. And, of course, he's talking about Emily Thornberry, who, if you remember, put out that tweet of white van man in Rochester with a Cross of St George on his van. And she's paid a very heavy price ever since for doing that. It's a very, very good message. As a proud Welshman, I want to say that if Ireland, Scotland and Wales have their own devolved parliaments, it's utterly disgraceful that England doesn't have its own voice for the English. Maybe this football malarkey, well, I love that word, will help this deliver to my English cousin, says Gareth in Caerphilly. Well, you know, I think there is a better compromise than building a separate English parliament and some sort of hideous glass structure somewhere in the Midlands. And that is, of course, just to have English-only days in Westminster. They are trying to go in that direction. Logically, I think it has to happen. Johnny from Norfolk says, you're absolutely right, Nigel. Look at some of the riots caused by sports fans in the US cities where their teams win something. It's nothing to do with nationalism. This type of behaviour is disgraceful and embarrassing. And yeah, you know, I absolutely agree with this. Interesting point Mary makes from Ealing. Things have been pretty grim in this country for a number of years now. It's great that there is something to celebrate for a change. Do you know, Mary, I kind of, growing up in the 60s and 70s, with the odd exception, like the 66 World Cup, which I have to confess I was too young to really remember, but we kind of got used to the fact, didn't we, that we were a nation in decline. We used to have this vast empire. We were in decline economically, in decline geographically, in decline in every way. And we kind of almost enjoyed losing badly. There's a younger generation out there that seem to me to have an absolute thirst for success. And we've seen, you know, the last 2 Olympic Games have shown you just how hungry this country is for success. So part of this is it's kind of wanting to get rid, perhaps, of some of the negativity they've seen from some of their parents. This younger generation, many of them, want success. With that comes an identity. Englishness is back on the agenda. Simon, our previous caller, you know, making clear that the Sikh community in parts of London are embracing it. Everyone's embracing it. I have no problem with it. I rather like it. Andrew Marr once, in a book he wrote about modern Britain, this goes back about 15 years, described his first meeting with me, and he said Farage is every Frenchman's stereotypical nightmare of what an Englishman might be. Well, thank you, Andrew. I'm actually really rather proud of that. Let's go to Joe in Hereford. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Nigel.
So the flags are going up, Joe, in Hereford as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I see them everywhere. The neighbours and that, they've all got the flags, and obviously the little ones that they pop on the cars as well. Yeah, yes. It's everywhere. So I actually proud Welshman myself, so this is more just an observation more than anything. But your earlier comment that you made about the flags going up, and should that cause concern within various communities, like places such as London, and I really don't think it should do, because at the end of the day, if you look at the ethnic diversity represented within the national football squad, and how they've all come together with a great deal of pride and a sense of teamwork to represent the Cross of St George, 3 lions on a shirt.
Yep.
So I don't think people should be concerned about it at all. And then the other point which follows on for that I wanted to make is, which has sort of been made before, is I think people need to not look at this as extreme nationalism or even necessarily a working class issue. It is loutish, yobbish, drunken.
Yep.
football fan behaviour, because I do believe within the realm of the football world there is a cohort of people that can behave like this for generations. With like firms in London, and stemming back to the 60s and 70s, just football violence. We've come away from that a lot now, but it's just this continuous sort of drunken behaviour that is associated with a lot, not all, but a lot of football fans in general.
And that's not about a resurgence of English nationalism. It's just bad behaviour. Joe, thank you from Hereford. Let's go to Mitcham and speak to Isabel. Good morning, Isabel.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Farage. Great to hear you. I just want to say that the national flag is something that is an outward expression of each country's identity.
Yep.
And every country in the world has its own flag. Every country is proud of its flag. It's nothing to do with class, whether you're working class or you're high up anyway. It is your national identity. And every country, you see them raising their flags for football or for anything that is important. And it is seen as something most natural. It's nothing to do with fascism or anything right-wing. It is your national identity.
So why, Isabel, have so many in the governing classes of this country look down their noses at any display of Englishness?
Because they've lost it. They haven't a clue about what it is
you're right.
To belong to a country, to have an identity. And those who come into our country and be part of it, if they don't like the flag, well, just shut up, It's the flag of this country, and every country has it. In fact, in some countries, if you denigrate the flag, you can even be chucked in prison.
Yes.
Come on.
Oh, yes, and I wouldn't suggest that we ever headed towards that direction. But no, Isabel, you're right. They've lost it. They're out of touch completely with the way ordinary people feel. Thank you for that call. Well, as I said, there have been many left-wing commentators writing over the last week telling us they want England to lose. I'll share some of that with you in a few moments' time. But come on. Most of these callers are saying, look, we hate the drunken, loutish behaviour. We can't stand what happened at that IKEA store, and go to lbc.co.uk to see it. But actually, what is happening here is healthy and is right. And I think it's all part of this massive trend that is sweeping the entire Western world, whether it's the election of Trump, Brexit, the changes in Italy. People want national identities, not some supranational mush. That's my view. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30 and football's coming home. We're winning. We're in the semi-finals. Mass celebrations, crosses and Georges everywhere, and a sense of English identity, a growing feeling of English nationalism. Is it a good thing, or is it a bad and a dangerous thing? But before I get back to that, Home Secretary Sajid Javid has been answering questions from reporters in Amesbury, Wiltshire this morning, where he's been to speak to the emergency services who responded after two people came into contact with Novichok last weekend.
And I want to take the opportunity to say to everyone, but especially local people, that the risk to the public remains very low. That is the clear advice of Public Health England. It's a clear advice of Sally Davies, the Chief Medical Officer. And then finally, of course, for all of us, I think our thoughts are with the man and the woman that are impacted by this latest incident, who are still in hospital, still in critical condition, and we're thinking of them and, of course, their family and their friends.
Police a couple of days ago said they were looking for a container or a receptacle. Have they found it?
The police are still working to work out exactly how these two individuals came across the nerve agent, and we don't want to jump to any conclusions. They have a number of working theories, but we want to make sure the police get the time, the space they need to do their work.
Mr. Javid, are there any plans for further sanctions against Russia?
There are no current plans. Again, we don't want to jump to a conclusion. Clearly what we have already determined, what our expert scientists have determined, is that the nerve agent in this incident is the same exact nerve agent that was used back in March. We know back in March that was the Russians, that we know it was a barbaric, inhuman act by the Russian state. But again, for this particular incident, we need to learn more and let the police do their work.
Well, Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, visiting the crime scene, trying to reassure everybody that Salisbury and indeed Wiltshire is open for business, but clearly no answers of any kind yet as to how these two people got poisoned, both of whom are still seriously ill. Back to football, and I have to say, much of London, central London this morning, looked pretty extraordinary. People sort of still staggering about all over the place. Mass celebrations. We don't want English football success to be associated with violence, extremism, people going into IKEA stores and jumping on the beds and terrifying everybody. But I do think this feeling of Englishness that has been deliberately and willfully suppressed for so long by those in positions of authority, I think it's out there and it's here to stay. I think so. What does Nobby from Vauxhall think? Morning, Nobby.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Well, I will say, listen, they were little rascals that went into IKEA and jumped on the bed. You know, it wasn't the right thing to do, no. But did they firebomb IKEA? Did anybody get murdered? This was just high spirits and jinx. I live in
Nobby, come on, they behave like yobbos.
Yeah, okay, but did anybody get their throat slit? Did anybody get?
No, I should jolly well hope they didn't either.
No, of course not. So we have different standards for different people that live in this country, different ideologies. Look, the main thing is, there's a good feeling in the country at the moment with England doing well. I live on the 19th floor of a tower block in South London.
Yep.
I've got my St George's crosses flying from my balcony. I only hope Emily Thornberry, that champagne socialist, can see my balcony from her £3 million house over in Islington. It's great. It's great what's going on in the country. I've got neighbours who are black, who come from different countries. Everybody is rooting for England to do well. Brixton. This flag's flying in Brixton. You know,
yep.
My mates who I grew up with, my West Indian friends, they're all rooting for England. They're English as much as what I am, Nigel. And these left-wing suppressors who want to keep us under their boot because we show a little bit of patriotism. You know, they make me bloody sick, mate.
Do you know what, Nobby? It is fascinating you say that because, for example, Rachel Cockrell published a piece in the New Statesman magazine. She said, I spent 3 months in Colombia last year. I hope England lose tonight. Corbynista supporter Ellie Mae O'Hagan said, I hope England get thrashed when they play Colombia. But how about this, Nobby? We got Paul Mason, okay, journalist, ex-BBC reporter, talking about his area. He says, my entire neighbourhood's gone nuts. And he says this, Nobby, and I want you to respond to him. Left-winger commentator Paul Mason says, I do not want to be English, and any attempt to create an English identity will fail. Without using any too bad of words, Nobby, message for left-winger Paul Mason?
You worked for the Brussels Broadcasting Corporation. I'm not surprised by anything you say.
Very, very sharp answer, Nobby. Thank you for your call. Thank you very much indeed for your passion. That was brilliant, wasn't it? Kevin is calling from Huddersfield. Kevin, good morning to you.
Morning, Nigel. You all right?
Well, of course I am. I mean, it's when we talk about Brexit that I get really upset and unhappy. But we're talking about this terrific run that we're having in the World Cup, and we're talking about, I mean, Kevin, you know, I used to, when I worked, before I was in politics and had a proper job, I come into London every day, and on St George's Day, every year, I try and get a rose and wear it and celebrate St George's Day. And everyone thought I was some sort of weird nutcase. Now, they probably still think I am a weird nutcase, but in this particular regard, suddenly, it seems, we want to be English, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, as I said to the lady who answered the phone in the first place, I'm not a football fan.
Yep.
I never have been. I didn't like football at school. We either do or we don't, and I don't. However...
Did you follow the game yesterday, Kevin, at all?
No.
Not at all? Right, OK. No. So how did you find out we'd won?
I checked the news.
Okay, fine.
I just went on and checked the news. Well, it is. I really hope that they do well. I hope they get to, the final. I hope they win. I really do. Bless them, But I'm not a football fan. But this has re-nationalised the country. Mm-hmm. It has put a good light on the St George's Cross, because the news just concentrates, especially the biased news, left-wing, they concentrate on all the bad stuff, and that's all that they pump out. and they make the flag look bad.
Yes, I mean, we really have been told, haven't we? We have been told for years, do not fly that flag. If you do that, you are supporting insularity, negativity, nastiness, beastliness, fascism. And we've just, I think collectively, Kevin, we've just stuck two fingers up to that.
Yeah, and the game, what's going on with the England team at the moment, and they're doing so well, has reinvigorated the good side of all that. It is being taken on board. It doesn't help when you've got drunken idiots doing what they did.
No, it doesn't.
And damaging that paramedic's car in London. I mean, that's a £25,000-30,000 vehicle that has potentially been written off. You know, that is so wrong.
No, that's just awful. Yeah.
Criminal damage. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
Well, let's hope, Kevin, that those that did that get the book thrown at them, yeah?
Absolutely. But there's nothing wrong with having a laugh with your mates, going out, having a drink and celebrating. But when you start doing stuff like that, you've crossed the line, and I hope that they find the people responsible for that damage.
Yeah, they will. And tell me, Kevin, Huddersfield, are there lots and lots of flags sort of flying out of bedroom windows and that kind of thing?
Yes. I mean, actually, where I live, I'm surrounded by 2 or 3 villages, and a lot of the buildings have the St George's flag on them pretty much most of the year.
Do they really?
Yeah. And the only time, because up in Yorkshire, we love displaying the white rose of Yorkshire.
Yes.
The only time that you don't see the flag on a bit is because the flag has deteriorated because of weather and...
Okay, so
like that.
It's interesting. So you're in one of those very rare parts of the country where the flag's seen quite a lot. Kevin, great call. Kevin, who did not follow the game in any way at all yesterday, found out later on the news that we'd won. That puts him in a minority. John is calling from Camden. John, are you one of those people shouting, "Come on, England"?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm happy to get involved in the whole kind of feeling, loving football, community spirit, etc.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think that it's just not really conducive to the kind of politics I support, and it's completely kind of against what you kind of represent, I guess.
Well, so John, you think this resurgence, because I think what's happening here is part of a much bigger trend across the West, that we're saying we want the nation state to be the building block that we identify with.
Right, and I'd say that patriotism and nationalism generally is kind of not the future, because ultimately I think we're living in a society which needs to be, putting aside the whole free trade arguments, in terms of environmentalism, in terms of AI, automation, in terms of intellectual rights. Ultimately, we need to kind of cooperate on a global level. And cooperating on a global level does require us to jettison some... I mean, call me a citizen of nowhere, but I think it does require us to think on a multilateral basis.
So when President Trump says, America first, but not alone, you probably feel quite repelled by that.
Not necessarily repelled, I just don't think it's necessarily a good idea.
Would you accept, John, that actually, you know, the kind of world that you look to, that in fact things are moving in the opposite direction really quite quickly at the moment?
No, I would accept that, and I think there are myriad reasons for it. Part of it is I probably would agree with you on this basis: political correctness.
Yep.
It's a kind of a snobbery from people like kind of typically what you'd probably characterise me as, the metropolitan liberal elite. It's kind of capitalism not working. It's I think it's the Reagan Thatcher consensus. I agree that there are many problems and they do need to be fixed, but I don't think promoting the nation state and patriotism is necessarily the right way to go about it.
Okay, John, thank you. John there with a cautionary note, and it's good to hear the other side of the argument, but I know most of you out there are cheering England on, probably going to have face paints tattooed on you for the semi-finals, and if we get there, the finals, hey, let's hope we do. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 11:46. Football's coming home. Hey, it's, you know, we're happy. We're celebrating. It's wonderful. We're in the semi-final. The flag's everywhere. There's a profound sense of Englishness in the air. More than I've ever seen. Certainly Dan from Obi says, Nigel, you're an Englishman. I'd love to have a beer with you in Leicester. You are what England stands for. That's a bit over the top, Dan, but thank you. Just seen the video of the IKEA fan invasion. Anyone wants to see it, it's there on lbc.co.uk. Pretty tame, I think. Just happy people. At least they're not jumping up and down on cars and ambulances like the other idiot. That is true. Now, I promised you we'd get a forecast for the last week of Wimbledon with John Ketley. We can't get hold of him. The line's down. Or maybe he's gone out to enjoy the sun. We just don't know. But we are, without John Ketley, we'll keep trying him and see if we can get, because he did tell us that Wimbledon fortnight will be great weather, and wow, he was right. It's okay, Nigel. You are a weird nutcase, but your own kind of weird nutcase. Keep it up, says Chili. Well, thank you very much, Chili. I made the point earlier on that when I used to wear a rose on St George's Day, people thought I was a weird nutcase. They may well still think that for other reasons, but Englishness is in fashion. We're going to go abroad to Wickford and speak to David. David, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yeah, I'm a Scottish chap. I've been living down south for 30 years, 10 years in Beckenham, 20 years in Wickford.
Yep.
And I can't see anything necessarily wrong with nationalism at all. It can only get bad if it warps itself into a kind of very right-wing fascism. But the way it seems to me is that the kind of left-wing viewpoint has tried very hard over the last 10 to 15 years to subjugate the feeling of nationalism. And basically what's happened is that you can only do that for so long until something else rebels against it. And the way that I see things is that people are starting to rebel against that kind of thought process. And the only problem as I see it is if it got too far and it warps itself into something a little bit like the Nazis of the 30s. But apart from that, English people should feel fine about how they're nationalists. The Scots feel fine about it, so why shouldn't the English?
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking in the 30s, of course, about this sort of cocktail of national socialism, aren't you?
Yes, of course.
Which is...
I've read all the books, Animal Farm, you name it. Yeah,
yes.
I mean, the only thing the Scots ever had against England, might be a wee bit of football history here for you. I'm old enough to remember the 60s, and I don't think we ever felt that the English people recognised well enough when Celtic won the European Cup in '67 for the first time, and it created a little bit of umbrage, if you like, because I remember I was in Scotland at the time and I was young, and we never ever felt that the English gave that team a little bit of the recognition it was deserved. It was a team that was built on £10,000 and won the European Cup. But apart from that, it lingered a little bit. But
and David, I joked at the start of this call that we were going abroad because we're going to speak to a Scotsman. I mean, you've been living here for 30 years.
Yes.
In England. Is what's happening unusual in the context of those 30 years?
Unusual, cool. That's a good
are there more England flags? I mean, I think there are more England flags around and more people celebrating being English than I've ever seen in my life.
Yes, because I think there's a rebellion taking place against the left. I mean, Paul Mason's viewpoint is, I mean, I was listening to a speech by Peter Shore, and I remember Peter Shore from the 60s, the Labour, very, very good speaker.
And very patriotic too.
Exactly. And he was from the left side.
Yes.
And Peter Shore argued very much against the common market, and the common market was sold to our generation as it was, a trading thing.
Yeah.
But the gradual evolution into a parliament, a separate parliament, where people seem to be getting very, very well-paid jobs, and it wasn't very clear how much they were achieving, apart from the fact that, you know, I mean, I'm not anti-capitalist at all. I mean, but the globalised nature of capitalism, to me, has created the banking crisis, which we're still all suffering from.
But it is interesting, David, this bit of, I mean, you mentioned Peter Shore. Tony Benn, very much on the left of British politics, an icon still for many on the left of British politics, fiercely patriotic. I mean, he flew a Spitfire in 1945, but he really, really, to the end of his life, a great believer in the country and all it stood for. And it seems to be that the old left were, I mean, Clement Attlee, Labour Prime Minister, on his door, it said Major Attlee. He carried that First World War Major title with him for the rest of his life. He was proud of the service that he'd done, that he'd given for the country. The old left were very patriotic. Some of the new left seem to just hate the concept of nation state entirely.
Because I think what's happened is that, as I said, it's an evolutionary process. And I remember the slogan, "Don't get foot and bend disease, vote for Margaret Thatcher." Now, I think Thatcher, to some extent, represented a change again in Britain, but I think there was going on behind the scenes where Thatcher's viewpoint was going to be used to move towards this global capitalism, but then she was dropped like a dead turkey once she was wanting to maintain the nation state.
Absolutely.
I do feel that there was something behind the Conservative Party and possibly very high multinational big business who wanted this kind of the free movement. The free movement of capital was fine up to a point.
Yeah, and they wanted cheap labour, David, too, didn't they?
Yeah,
they wanted cheap labour.
And but they managed to say to if you want to call it the working class, to say, look, this is good for you. But how can it be good for you if there are no council houses built? People can't afford their houses. The National Health Service is struggling because the banks failed. How can that kind of form of left of centre approach be said to be working for...
Well, and that's why, David, it's losing. That's why we're seeing the big change we're seeing politically. But maybe with this England campaign, we're seeing it socially too. David, I thank you. Darren says, Ketley's in the pub having a beer. No, he's not, Darren. They don't open till 12. And we're very sorry we haven't got John today. Linda says, wonderful to see some patriotism at last. And Heather's hilarious. She says, I live in a tiny bungalow and I'm surrounded by multi-million-pound houses. I will upset them all this afternoon when I put up my St George's flag. You do that, Heather. And there is, and Heather's point, there is still something of a class issue about this. Of that, there is no doubt. Not completely, but a division is there. The Church of England flies the flag. Does that mean the antis dislike churches too? Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, many of the antis, I think, have actually taken over the Church of England. Robert is calling from Ealing. He's going to be my last caller on this subject this morning. Hello, Robert.
I hope there'd be many more, but you don't have time, Nigel. Thanks
no, that's right.
I remember 1966. There are more flags out now than there were then. And what your previous callers have mentioned is it seems to be selective xenophobia. It was okay during the royal weddings to have the flag of St George's all over St George's Chapel and for us to be English then. And we spoke a couple of 6 weeks ago relating to St George's Day and drink-ups in New York, you may remember.
Yes.
As a consequence, most people claim to be of British or English ancestry in America, and they do, but everybody flies the St Patrick's flag over there.
I know. But this is because, as I said, Robert, Scottish nationalism, Irish nationalism, Welsh nationalism are seen to be trendy. Anything approaching English nationalism, and they all get a fit of the vapours, don't they?
It does. Now, on the subject, if you could arrange some crowdfunding for replacing the ambulance and paramedics car, that is absolutely moronic. The National Health Service shouldn't have to pay, nor should the taxpayer, but we shouldn't also take the heat off finding those thugs and morons that did this. I'm disgusted. But nonetheless, keep up the good work now, Nigel. Let's all fly the flag and get behind the home.
Well, we are flying the flag, aren't we? And so 1966, so, I mean, I was alive, but I don't remember it. When we won the World Cup, I mean, were there big street celebrations, or were we more reserved 50 years ago?
They were all in the fountains at Trafalgar Square. I was too young then. I was just 12. But of course, you can see the video footage now, and there was mass celebrations. And your previous caller from Wickford via Scotland. Nothing wrong with flying your own flag. It's absolute madness that some of these people they'd find a fight in an empty bar, but then again, Nigel, if we couldn't get served, we'd want to fight everybody too.
Well, you may be right. Robert, thank you very much indeed. Nigel, it's Mohammed from Nottingham. I think it's absolutely fantastic to see the St George's flag all about. We need unity at times like this, especially with Brexit. I was born and bred here, but my parents were from Pakistan. More should be done in our community on being proud to be English. All the best. Well, Mohammed, that may well be true, but some of the evidence we've had, and okay, it's just phone calls and messages, but there are a lot of members of the ethnic communities flying across St George and saying, come on, England. Well, let's hope we get to the final. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night at 7. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Kevin Maguire.
Thank you, Nigel. You sound disturbingly happy and chipper.
Well, that's because we talked about Brexit for the first hour, which depressed me.
I heard.
But football, okay. I mean, and it is coming home, isn't it?
Back of the net. As Alan Partridge would say. Thanks, Nigel.